Hi, and welcome to HADA Institute. My name is Helen, and I am your trainer for the Diploma of Mental Health. This is an introduction into studying with HADA. So each week we do the acknowledgement of country, and that is adhered to it for every session. Each week we also do what we call housekeeping, and we go through the processes around the expectations in class and about keeping to our duty of care and being mindful of our biases and our language that we use in class. We also look at different assessments, so online quizzes, case studies, research papers, role plays, and practical assessments. So some roles that will need to be live with a trainer, and you'll notice that in your assessment task section where it's written in red if a live assessor needs to be involved, and then you can reach out and email your trainer. And the other role plays that you have there can actually be done with your family, peers, or friends or colleagues. And if you need help finding out how to do role play, it's good to book in with a trainer and with Calendly, which I'll explain later on, and have a look at how role plays are processed. So in your course, you will have a placement component. So that's completed closer to the end. So at least 70% of your work completed in your main course section. And then what we have is called skill track, and they will organise and contact you and then start to talk about placement. You can also go and have a look at other places for placement as well yourself, and then you can bring that information back to HADA Institute, and they'll put it on to the relevant people. Just remember there will be tasks that you do on placement as well. So there's a set of case plans and reports that you have to do as well. With your marking, we aim to get it done within 48 business hours. Sometimes that's probably not possible, especially if you submit on a Friday and we have a weekend break. Now, any assessments that you have that come back and you need to correct, you only need to do the answers that were incorrect, and there'll be a marker guide on where to take that response. Now, just be careful of being of no plagiarism here, in that when you're doing a report paper, especially, that you're referencing your work and you're ensuring that you're validating where the information has come from. And you can get an extension if you reach out to your trainer or LSO, and I'll explain that session in a minute. So if you need any learning support through HADA, we have a new system where you can book on this link here, calendly.com.d/DNT-FBJZ2D. Now here is a direct link to a trainer booking, or you can have email learning support, and I'll give you that email very shortly. Just remember, at HADA, it is a unique approach around that. It starts at the beginning of most new units. So each unit, all learners coming into that area are new, no matter how long they've been at HADA. But it's a rolling intake, so people come in at different times throughout the year. So if you're connecting and having issues with Accelerate and any IT issues, you can email lso@hadainstitute.edu.au. You can also use this to ask any questions or seek support. So there's a couple of role play recordings that are in your learner resource. One is about what we're looking for in a role play, and the other one is how to upload a role play. They're in your resource section in Accelerate. So we're here to provide support in a safe learning environment, but some of the content can actually be triggering for you. It might cause an anxiety reaction. please do seek for support if that happens. And there's a whole list of supports in your learner handbook. And don't forget that you're new to studies. It can be a stressful time. There can be a lot of anxiousness, and that is a normal part of that process until you understand how everything operates. But if you're still having some concerns, please reach out to myself or to lso@haiderinstitute.edu.au, and we can get you some support and take you through those processes of how to set up your assessments and tasks and where to focus and how to build a study plan. So welcome to Haida and enjoy your learning.
Rest.
So welcome everybody to CHCMHS012, provide support to develop wellness plans and advance directives. Now, this is an interesting module that has a lot of legal information here as well around the directives and what the responsibility is of the worker, of the participant, of the family members, of the legal system that supports an advance directive. Advance directives can be done for many different reasons, but it is one of the part of the legal aspects that some of us might go into with work in the future. And it's also actually really good information to know if you were even working in a community centre setup where families might have questions about that for loved ones. What do I do with these? So with these advanced directives, and how do I activate them? Where do I get the information? But it is quite interesting. It can be a challenging area for families to be involved in because there's lots of decisions to be made for a participant who's going into care and around how much participation they can be involved in that. Right, so Trudy, please, could I have you do the acknowledgement? You got your sound, Trudy?
Thank you. I
See,
thought
I'm
you
not the
guys
only
could
one.
mine or lip read or something. In the spirit of reconciliation, Haida Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs that sharing and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respects to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging.
Thank you, Trudy.
No.
Right, so this is what we call housekeeping. Welcome, Cithel.
Hello, Helen. How are you?
Good, thank you. So Belinda, with each week we have our housekeeping. So part of that is that we work with our cameras on and our mics off whilst I'm presenting. And we have this hand emoji here. Now down the bottom of your screen, I think it's called reactions, and it looks like a bit of a love heart on a tilt. And if you click on that, you'll see raise hand. And you can do that if you want to ask a question whilst I'm presenting. Often we'll just open up the floor and you know, people can speak. That's it. Got it. Well, that's, you got your thumbs up. Good. So that's one of your participation things. Thank you, Alexander. That's one of your participation tools here. We also do what we call breakout rooms. So you will go into a breakout room and do research or a role play activity or discussion with your peers. It's not recorded in breakout rooms. That's learner space only. And that's where you support each other with your learning in there and share information as well. We have break times. We've broken that down into one 20-minute block from about between 20 past 7 to 7:30. We'll go for a 20-minute break. And we have no smoking or vaping on screen. You're all adult learners. If you're doing something like that or eating your meal, just please turn your screen off. Happy for you to do that. We talk about with our duty of care. So our duty of care is to have respectful, non-judgmental language and communication. And when we're listening to others, we listen with intent, we participate, we encourage, and we're all learners in this together. So just be careful of the words that we use. Some of the content throughout the modules might have what we call a trigger for you. So that could be stirring up some sort of emotion or reaction to something that's made you feel heightened or unsettled. And that's where you can reach out for online support. And I'm just going to bring that up now. So just reminding everybody, this is what's in your handbook, learner handbook. In your learner handbook, Belinda, you've got a self-help resources section, and it will have all these contacts, but these are really good for you to start building your resources for the future work in the industry as well. And everybody, please just remember to be kind to yourself, look after, make sure you're giving yourself, nourishing your mind, getting some fresh air throughout the week, working full time, studying, parenting, relationships, all these other things are quite stressful. So just remember to look out for yourself. Welcome, Nathan. So session 1, welcome Nathan. Good to see you. Right, so the purpose of a wellness plan. We're just going straight into this. So has anybody ever worked with a wellness plan? Has anybody ever helped somebody write a wellness plan? That'd be more where you might have had something to do with that. It's where we set goals for somebody who's living with mental health illnesses and disorders. We look at how we set goals for the recovery journey. And wellness and recovery is often being seen as a similar term. So it's a lot of people might say recovery plan, and the new language around that is wellness, mental health and wellness, because that actually comes from the Mental Health and Wellness Act of 2022 from Victoria. So the idea of overall wellness besides your recovery, the recovery is that journey part that you take. And this is where strategies on what's going to happen for the participant in how to reach their recovery goals happen. This is a collaboration between, could be a case manager, it could be a mental health peer worker, it could be somebody who manages intake services for mental health. This is where strategies are discussed around how and what this is going to look like for the participant, and takes into considerations things that could become barriers or blockages or what we call triggers to upset that balance of process as well, because a wellness plan is about a recovery that goes up and down. And it's very rarely for individuals to just have a straight line of recovery. Life happens, life events happens, and things can upset that balance. So it's good to have things in play that can be working there towards the context of recovery. If there's a bit of a hiccup, we'll have more strategies to work that and get back on track with that. But this is about what we call, it's a document that has the wishes of the person who wants to who wants to recover and move forward and live their best life. And it's a document that takes into account if you're doing well, if you're becoming unwell. Yes, Tash?
I was just wondering, is this only used in palliative care, or is this
No,
so it's not like palliative care wellness plans?
no.
Okay.
Wellness plan, no. You might be thinking of the what we will talk the consent to I can't think of the words now. But this could be around the legal and ethical considerations that when you're making a directive notice, that can be around palliative, but it's not always around palliative. This
Okay.
is a
Thank you.
recovery. This is just so you know that a directive can be used in many different situations. And a directive can also happen with mental health, where you might have had a tribunal that has decided that the person needs to go into formal care. So there's a directive and a plan that goes with that. And these plans are for people working towards managing mental illness, in this case that we're talking about. It's not a cure. It's about having the tools and the strategies to live their best possible life. And it's about managing symptoms, living well, having recovery plans to recover through certain periods of that time frame, and help somebody take responsibility for their care. And a wellness plan also identifies resources and services that they have collaborated on with case management per se to support their recovery, and it'll have the roles and the responsibilities in there as well, everyone that's involved in this person's plan. So often people have family members involved in their plan as support people, and that would be your informal supports. You'll have formal supports where you might have peer workers, group support workers, case managers, psychologists, and it's about an agreement with services that you're going to have, activities and supports, everything that's going to support that person's wellness. And it's a recovery. It's not a short-term thing. It's a very long-term thing, something that's continually reevaluated as you go along. And the awareness builds as these recovery plans start to pull together strategies, ways of being, moving forward, that the realization that mental health is actually linked to physical, emotional, and social factors. And all of that impacts on the overall well-being. This is why we're calling it a wellness plan, takes in a holistic approach like this. And what what healthy activities are good for you, what foods are good nutrition, adequate sleep, regular connections with people, practicing personal strategies that could be around that mindfulness, journaling, step walking, where it's a very focused step walking where it's one foot in the other and it's very concentrated focus and it's concentrating on breathing. Some people do Tai Chi as well. So all these things come together to build the wellness plan. So this is from the Mental Health Foundation of New Zealand, and I thought it was a good quote to bring up around wellness and recovery. So our goal is to move everyone, including those who experience mental illness, up the spectrum towards flourishing. We know this is possible. We see it every day. We know mental health is not just the absence of mental health is not just the absence of mental illness or the symptoms of mental illness. The actions we take to address symptoms doesn't necessarily improve well-being. This is where this comes in. Mental well-being is feeling good, functioning well, and feeling connected. And that's where we talk about people operating at their best levels, where they feel that they are functioning, connected, included, and living their best lives. So the purpose of a wellness plan. This is in one of your questions in your assessments for a start. So this information will be very handy for you. So one of the questions in your assessment does ask about what is the purpose of a wellness plan? Does it cover and help cure or help the recovery? Now, a wellness plan has many components to it, but it can't make people adhere to it. That's one thing that it cannot make people do. So there has to be the want and the drive and the need to want to be able to focus on this plan and keep moving forward. It also doesn't take over and replace other treatments here. It's about putting everything together as a package and making it have a timeline and how it's going to work for the participant. And it's a build-up of concrete information that if it's not acted upon, there won't be any change. So then that means the wellness plan is not in control of that because it's up to the participant and how the case manager works with that and how much they activate those strategies. The wellness plans are also only effective if they're kept up to date. And often the participants' needs change here. So this is why it's good to do a frequent review of the plan that you have in place to see if it's actually working for you. And a wellness plan that does not mean that the person will no longer experience symptoms. It's a tool to help reduce those symptoms for dealing with them when they do occur. So strategies, resources, knowledge, professionals in place, formal supports, informal supports, on-call strategies for if somebody's having any sort of crisis that's happening for them. If a trigger's happened or a barrier's happened where their circumstances have changed, it's good to be able to refer to that plan and be able to have supports there as well. So the different types and formats of a wellness plan, and there are many different types and formats because each organisation will have their own type of plan as well. And it's certainly I think the most workable wellness plans are the ones that have been actually formatted by people who have lived experience of mental health issues. So they can actually understand that process and the development and have the strategies and the best knowledge here with that input into those plans. And there's that it will incorporate strategies for practice, and it can actually also give an insight into what the outcomes can be, and it is much more reflective of the person's mental health needs, and it gives an overview of where somebody's heading to, the challenges that may be there. So all those things can be in place, and it's a good guide for the participant that this is created for, to be able to refer to and to even help them stay on track or get back on track. And this is where you would have all the resources for if somebody felt like they'd gone off track. All those resources, who do I call? What do I do? What strategy do I do in place? What things do I need to do to help me get through? And with a wellness plan, there also comes the responsibility of the legal and ethical considerations of the organisation and what they're making this plan for their participant. And there has to be the legalities around safety, around disclosure. Us as the workers have a duty of care to report somebody who's at risk. And this is often where a client may threaten to harm themselves or harm someone else. It's around that disclosure that that person has done something. They might disclose of something that happened to them. And especially if you're working with young people, what they might tell you and disclose, because you're their safe person, you have a responsibility to act upon that. And this is part of our principles and ethical practices here, because we're working from a basis of honesty, integrity, accountability, and we are trying to keep upright the access and equity for all participants here. So it's around that social justice. We also have that responsibility for maintaining safety and ensuring that the participant understands what these context of these mean for them. So if they do disclose, what will happen? What are you obligated to do as the worker? Because it's a legal obligation in Australia. If somebody divulges something to you and you're in a position where you would be somebody who is what we call a mandatory reporter. So you hold a position where you have a responsibility to either report to your supervisor directly. You might need to report to the police if you do not have that processes in your organisation. There's usually a flow chart of processes to follow. Alexander?
Oh, sorry, Helen, I really didn't want to ruin your flow. I was just curious. I understand with that, if you're in part of an organization or something like that, it goes to your higher ups. I was curious if you have, say, for example, uh, you see a psychologist. I understand they're, and I talk about suicidality. I understand that they're liable in some way if something happens to me, but who do they report that information to? So
Okay,
in
so
a psychologist position.
yeah, depending on what the call for. So if it's a disclosure of harm to do with self-harm around suicide,
Mhm.
not suicide ideation, which is the talking of, but if
Yeah.
somebody's actually made a plan and if somebody's actually put things in place and
Mhm.
they feel very they often, people will say that I do not trust myself here. I'm having
Mhm.
these thoughts. That is an ambulance and straight away.
Perfect. That's
So
right. I
that
just
would
wasn't
be,
sure. Thank you.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Now, the other aspects around that there could be the possibility, so then they need to be having support because they need to be on watch then and safeguarded. So that
Mhm.
could be going to a mental health unit, and that could be a psychologist referring them to there or going through that same process, and could even be organizing for that person to be taken there and to have that support as well. So each organization will have processes. You as a worker will often either go straight to your supervisor, and there should be a flow chart in each organization of what to report and where to go with that.
Brilliant.
And if all else fails and you do not have that flow chart and somebody's at major risk of harm or committing harm to somebody else, police, ambulance.
Thanks so much, Helen.
So
Thank you.
no worries. Tash?
I've just got a question where it says when a client discloses information about sexual abuse of a child,
Mhm.
if you were a colleague of that worker and the worker didn't mandatorily report it, is it your duty of care to report it if it's not your participant or client?
Yes. You still have an obligation here.
Yeah, that's where I was just trying to draw the line. Like, you would still have to mandatorily report because you've heard it. I wasn't sure if it was because it was secondhand knowledge.
Yeah. No, if that's been evident, that person has seen evidence or even heard of that, even if it's a suspicion of it, is still liable to report it. Even if it turns out to be a suspicion and it didn't happen, then you've covered those bases. If you didn't and it actually had happened, where would you be sitting then?
Yeah, you would be in some serious legal strife.
Right? Because it is up to our responsibility, our duty of care, even the suspected, is to be reported, and the correct people, child safety in this instance, would do their investigations with the police. And they would bring in detectives if that was that case. If it turned out to be nothing, and it was, I don't know what we could say here, if it didn't turn out to happen, thank goodness for that person. But it's always around, it's still our responsibility. If you saw a client come in and they were working with somebody else and they had bruises on their arms, it's still worth reporting to your line manager, your supervisor, that you saw this and you know that they're working with somebody else. I just wanted to ensure that I had put my notification in too as well.
Oh, okay, that's
Teaching.
where I was going at because I wasn't sure if that was stepping on people's toes, like, not going past your boundary.
Well, there's boundaries and there's responsibilities here. And if you identified that and saw that, And you would probably know your colleague would put that into action.
Yeah.
But you cited the bruises.
Yeah.
All right. So
All right,
even
thanks,
going to
Helen.
your line manager. Okay.
Thank you.
Think about a teacher at school, and they might identify something in that child's behavior, the changes in how they look, their non-participation, their behaviors that pull away. They would go straight to a guidance officer at the school who has a direct line to reporting. And that's part of our duty of care. And there could be many circumstances why a child may have different circumstances happening for them, but it's always best to check. So our role is maintaining professional standards here. It is about working within the law. We often have to have and make sure that we're maintaining our professional boundaries as well around how much our participants connect with us. We're not their best friends. You might get on really well with your participants, but it is a therapeutic relationship here. And there has to be boundaries for their safety as well as your own safety. It is a professional standard to have. Now, it's always good to explain to people with a wellness plan that you, by law, must disclose anything if that person says they've come to a stage where they disclose something that puts them unsafe, or even if they're having those thoughts, that something can be put into play as an early intervention to prevent something getting worse. This is where part of our role is quite layered up as workers in this industry, that our codes of practice, our duties of care, the Mental Health Act that we follow for workers in the industry, we're all guided by this to help people living with mental health issues, illnesses, disorders, what each person wants to identify them as. And these practice guides are relevant to each sector that you work in. And this is about having a guide for workers, supporting them to ensure that their behavior is ethical, it is legal, and it has the key principles and values underpinning the mental health sector, which is about respect, advocacy, recovery, working in partnership, and commitment to supporting the best services and support for our participants. Now, it's quite a responsibility, but it's quite complex around making sure that we're following and adhering to us. This is our legal responsibility here. When you do not do that, there's quite impactful results for you if you do not. And you can actually be charged for negligence. You can actually lose your license to work in the industry. And so when we look at it, our roles in the industry are very governed by legal and ethical considerations. Our practices, our behaviors, how we respond to people, making sure that we're also then following our organizational requirements as well. And this is why it's always good to revisit these as well. When you onboard with an organization, they will go through all this with you, but the handbooks they give you, you keep them on your desk as much as possible that you can. You can always revisit them, but it's a timely reminder that we have the R word, responsibility. And I can't stress it enough about how taking that seriously, when you've followed policies and procedures of engagement in working and delivering service, if there was a complaint process and you had done that, and that would be cleared. If you had not followed those policies and procedures, your what we call legal and ethical requirements here, it becomes rather tricky. Now, part of the legal and ethical considerations is around the participant's dignity of risk. Can anybody give me a description of what they know the dignity of risk to be? Alexander?
I hope I don't mangle this. It's their right to behave in ways that isn't necessarily life-threateningly dangerous. For example, smoking or things like that are dangerous but not immediately life-threatening.
Yeah. So to be able to make a choice. Trudy? Your mic.
Yeah, dignity of risk is actually you actually manage. Actually, hang on. It's actually what the legal responsibility of not only us as a worker, but we, for example, you don't expect someone to go to a huge restaurant when they've got their food is a trigger. You can actually minimize the risk, but also give them the choice of in a smaller version. Just, you can either have, instead of going to a big restaurant, maybe you offer 3 different choices of smaller ones because of
Yes.
their triggers, because you're still managing the risk, but you're also giving them the dignity to choose.
Well said, because still giving them the right to choose, but not putting them into a position that you know will trigger. So that is coming from somebody who knows that participant as well, quite well, and knows their case as well. Ro?
Yeah, my understanding was just to take reasonable risks in the pursuit of personal growth. Was my understanding.
Yes. So when you say in the pursuit of personal growth, how would you define that for me?
So if you're if take Trudy's example of like eating disorder, so your personal growth or your goal can be to be able to go out into a restaurant and sit down and have a meal with your family. And so you take the smaller steps, so that whatever your goal is, that personal growth you want to achieve. Yeah. So you take little risks or reasonable risks as to not re-trigger or set yourself back, but to try and move forward.
Definitely. And moving forward, that's the one of the key words. But it could be taking risks that you know there could be triggers with as well, because it's about them wanting to have a choice to try it. Our job is to make sure we're informing them with the most information, moving forward with that choice. And if they still want to make a choice to do something, then they could enjoy that and actually make a success of it. And if not, learn from that around what is what works for them. But this dignity of risk is actually critical in that support recovery phrase, in that wellness plan, in that being able to make own decisions and take risks. It fosters a sense of self-worth here and agency, as we call it. Some people call it empowerment. I like to call it agency, where they're providing their leadership through this, through their choices, where we actually help with the knowledge. What if you did it this way, this might be the outcome, or this, and then letting somebody have the choice. As we were talking before around part of the legals and ethicals, it's around mandatory reporting. And who knows who would be deemed a mandatory reporter? Who knows legally who has to be reporting, Ro?
Is it teachers, doctors, people in mental health spaces, any police, social workers?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
People in those positions where they're managing and supporting people. And each state actually has a list of different people chosen as mandatory reporters. Now, for instance, the child abuse ombudsman is not an actual reporter, but the people who work for the ombudsman would be. So there's all different types in each state that are mandatory reporters, and they're compelled by law to report child abuse, neglect, suspected child abuse and neglect. So Tash, going back to that suspected wondering if somebody was suspected of being a victim of abuse, it's all under this reporting. So even at, like, in that process, not stepping on toes, it's actually you doing your duty of care by going to your supervisor and
Yeah,
saying something.
that was my train of thought. It was just more of like, you know, I just wanted to make sure I
Professionally.
was on the right, being professional.
Yeah. And it's going to your supervisor is the best way forward. And it's not about professionally standing on somebody's toes. Certainly look at it as your duty of care here. Gabby?
Yeah, can I just say that although you've got police officers and psychologists and so forth to report mandatory report, we know that, but I don't know if it's in other states, but in Victoria actually encourages even just you're a citizen to actually
Yes.
report suspected abuse or anything. So they encourage that, I just thought I'd say that. Yeah.
Thank you, because Victoria is the only state that actually officially say that in
Yeah.
the act as well. So it's interesting because anybody can actually report suspected abuse to child safety in their states or territories. Anybody can ring up, and you can do it anonymously if you have a suspicion of something happening. Where we say mandatory, you must by law, you're compelled, as they say, by law. But like Victoria actually says, they encourage all participation of the community to report something if they have seen something or they fear something might have happened. This is in line with the domestic and family violence services within the state that have changed over the time. This is also in line with the Mental Health and Wellness Act as well, and the Child Safety Act, that the encouragement of community are the ones with the eyes everywhere more than just the police or a doctor or a nurse or a school teacher or a childcare worker. These community can often see more things. And very good point to bring up, Gabby. I think that's actually where I would like to see anybody encouraged to report some sort of, if they felt there was neglect, or to report that they had seen something happening, to be able to report it straight away. But there are certain processes in different states and territories, as said. Some are quite open where it just goes straight to the police. Others have the child welfare department. Others have different processes that for reporting. But it's a legislation. And when it's a government legislation, that's a law, which is something that has been set out to make sure that reporting of abuse and suspected neglect is done. This also then coincides with when, as workers, we have to have a workers' clearance check. So you might have a blue card, you might have a yellow card, you might have the NDIS worker screener clearance test, the disability support worker clearance. You might have all different types of requirements in your state or territory where you live around how you are going to have a police check. That is besides having the formal workers card to approve you to work in that industry. So I know Queensland has a blue card. Victoria has a working with children check. What does New South Wales have? Does anybody live in New South Wales? Do they know?
They have a working with children.
They have a working with children as well. Thank you, Ian. What about WA? Anybody from WA here tonight?
They also have working with children. Canberra
Right,
has only working with vulnerable people.
vulnerable people. Okay, see, so the wording's changing here. Thank you, Ian. Anybody from Tasmania? Northern Territory? South Australia? Mike's, Trudy, there you go.
We have the working with children check. That's the main one, but we've also got vulnerable persons, working with persons with a disability. But the main one is probably the working with children check. But when I get more,
is that actually what we call working with children check? Is that actually yellow?
no, we don't have a card actually. We have a number on my organisation that I work for. Has a working with children check number, and the NDIS workers with a number. The blue card that I'm used to is actually that authorises me to use restrictive practices called CPI. So
okay.
That's my blue card. So when you say blue card, I think, oh yeah, everyone can be has been trained on. Yeah.
No, it's actually give me 2 moments. I'm just going to press pause here and I'll go and get them for you. Alrighty, so hang on, get my, that's a blue card in Queensland.
Ah,
So your license, your picture on it, it's an actual working with children check. Notify of blue card services. Yep, so working with children card. Victoria, it's yellow. Different costs in different states as well, but it's certainly set up like your, no, it's not going to show properly here. Certainly set up like your license where you have your picture, a number, you've got a code. And the code where you said in South Australia, you have a number with your organisation, we can link this card to each organisation that we work at throughout our working life. So all they have to do is actually to validate our blue card up here is to go to the blue card organisation and get that number, and they link it to the org that you start work with. So different processes in different areas. A lot of states also still require the police check as well for certain roles in the industry as well. So mandatory reporting. It's around those education workers, the welfare, medical, law enforcement. But as I said, here's for Tasmania, for instance, healthcare and welfare, registered medical practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists, youth workers, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, and dental hygienists. And that's in Tasmania. Now, that's different to other states. Now, when they talk about children's services, that is around childcare workers, family day carers, home-based carers. Now, for residential services, that is also around refuge workers, and supervisors in a boarding place, and when they class law enforcement, police, of course. But for education, it's primary and secondary, teachers, principals, school nurses. Now, it's interesting, in Queensland, the school health nurse doesn't report to the education department as per se. If they're reporting a suspected, they actually work under the Queensland Health, and they do that through that way. And the information is kept separate from the department. So there could be two reports happening here. The guidance officer might do it and the school nurse might do it. So each state, it's always good to check out when you do start a new job, who is actually deemed a mandatory reporter. And the social workers, ministers in any sort of religion, community corrections officer, public servants, government agency people in certain states, okay, so are all reporters as well. So part of our other legal responsibilities here are around those considerations around discrimination and working within the anti-discrimination laws. And to discriminate working against someone for their age, race, sexual orientation, intersex status, choices people make as well, all these things that discriminate and put somebody down and disclude them and identify them and make shame around and non-inclusive actions. It's all guided by there's a few different discriminations acts in Australia. This is another one of your task questions. And it talks about what discrimination laws, legals and ethicals are in the country, in your state and national. So Age Discrimination Act 2004, the Disability Discrimination Act of 1992, the Racial Discrimination Act of 1975, which has actually had an amendment, which is an update. The Sex Discrimination Act of 1984. That's just some of those acts that actually govern discrimination. There's also the Australian Declaration of Rights, and there's also internationally the United Declaration of Rights, of Human Rights, sorry, that governs the proposed freedoms and choices for people across the world as well. So I'm pretty sure the question might ask for state, national, and international acts or legislations or rights that govern around discrimination. So those legal and ethical considerations I've mentioned a few times tonight around our duty of care. And it is another legal requirement to take responsibility to care to protect the people that we work with in the community, the people that we're supporting from any foreseeable injury. And don't forget that a foreseeable injury is not just a physical one. It could be an emotional one as well. So psychological damage in the workplace is rather recently new in the industry. That is something that's brought in through workplace health and safety, but that is now a law. And it's interesting that the law doesn't totally define what reasonable care is, but it also depends on a number of factors. So it depends on the factor of the sector that you're working in, and it also looks at if the participant has acted recklessly to cause harm and you weren't able to prevent that because of that other person's actions. But for us in the industry, part of our training, it's part of our qualifications that we do. And it's also the duty of care is for 18 and over. And we have to understand that our duty of care changes towards the different ages that we have. So for younger people, that certainly changes up when we have that mandatory reporting. Now, mandatory reporting is also in sectors for people who are at risk of harm or causing harm as well. It's not just around young people. Don't forget that. And psychological damage in the workplace doesn't just relate to the participant, it also relates to the worker. Now, it also works on the duty of care of what that person's position is in the organisation. So if you're a supervisor, you're actually likely to have a higher duty of care than that of somebody who's doing part-time support work. And even though that support worker has a duty of care to do reporting, the supervisor manages all these people. So they have to be over everything. So that support worker might directly report to their supervisor that something has been identified, do the relevant paperwork, hand that in, and it might be the supervisor that does the reporting of this. They're then responsible for the worker, for what they've been through as well, ensuring that paperwork's been identified, the abuse has been reported if that's what they're reporting. But there's processes, but depending on your role in the organisation to the higher duty that you will have the responsibility for others here. And often, and some organisations do stress this, that we all actually have a duty of care to our colleagues. And we also have a duty of care to visitors to the organisation. And that includes their family members. So families of participants that are coming in, we have a duty of care to ensure their safety as well. If their actions are unsafe, it's our duty to be able to put something in place to ensure that those behaviours cease. So it's about a reasonableness, as they call it, around determining what would see as any given situation that we would have to take into account the circumstances that are happening. And the main thing to work off here is that being reasonable about things. So we, with our duty of care, we're also looking at what we call assessing risks attached to that person's choices, which can be around that dignity of risk, but also some of the actions that you might have from somebody who's come into, let's say, an AOD service, and they've came in and they've actually used alcohol or other drugs before coming in, and they're not in a position to be able to make choices, decisions, and their behaviour could be quite erratic. So then in this case, it's high risk to themselves, to others, and to the worker. So they won't be given service, but they will be supported to go to another safer place to be able to get to a space where they will be calmed down. They might be offered food, drink. They might be taken to another area outside of the service, away from other service users. Often they will have an area to the side where you can go and sit with this person until somebody can come and safely pick them up. So these are things that potential risks that we have to assess. It's our duty of care to take action. It's also our duty of care to take action to make sure that person's safe. So we have to also think about how, and if we're telling the supervisor or the manager, because we have to also consider their confidentiality, but consulting your supervisor about what to do is the most relevant professional way to act, because that person, as I said, has a higher duty than you. So if you've got a supervisor over you, they're the ones who will make the overall decision. Because if anything goes wrong and you haven't acted accordingly, as I said, you can be sued for breach of duty of care. If somebody's been injured resulting from that breach of care, that's been with you, either in your care or within reasonable consideration that they've been in your service. And the protection will not be given to you if you failed to follow organisation policies and procedures, if you have broken the law, and if you have clearly breached your duty of care. quite a serious, accountable guideline that we adhere to here. Remembering with our legal and ethical considerations, informed consent from participants. We're sharing the information with them. We're sharing them the possible risks, the possible outcomes, positive and possibilities of harm that could happen by making a certain choice. Because if they're going to propose doing something, giving them the most knowledge around something, informed knowledge, informed equals informed consent. We have to help our participants have a clear and understandable picture of what making that decision is going to be based on, because we're there to help them with all the available information. And each organisation will have their own policies and procedures on regarding informed consent. So that is another intake onboarding training that you should have when you first started with an organisation. Because when we look at the risks and benefits of something for somebody, we have to be clear that those actions can take place in a safe way and decisions are made for somebody, especially if they're doing informed consent around mental health and going to a live-in facility or going to a hospital for mandatory 3 days. If we're seeking support from a psychologist and psychiatrist, what's that going to mean for me? If somebody's actually mandated to report to have live in support in a mental health clinic, they still have partly informed consent around what will happen. They still have informed consent around medications and practices and activities. So there's informed consent with being able to move forward with a proposed recovery plan, a proposed action, a proposed support, and helping that participant understand as much as possible what will happen, what are the likely outcomes, what are your rights to choice in this. This is really important here around that rights to choice, because often, and we've heard many stories where people have gone in to be assisted with mental illness and feel like they've been told what they have to do, not being a part of the collaboration to choose what's going to happen next. Think about, would you want your right to decide what's going to happen to you taken away because you have a mental illness? Then we're going back into discrimination again. One last thing before we go to break. One of our last legal and ethical considerations is around record management. And these are often hard copies as well as electronic copies. So there'll be passwords, online management systems, access rights to systems. Who's got actually has access to a participant's file to be able to update information? Do you need to go through a procedure to be able to go through the steps to be cleared to use that? I know with certain things with the what we called Quip and Ship in Queensland, and it's a housing platform, and it holds individuals' information, private information around what's happening for them and their families, and what areas of housing they're looking for. And every time we wanted to get on, we had to email for a code. And if that code wasn't actioned within the 5 minutes, that you were locked out. You couldn't get in. You had to then apply for another code. That code only lasted for a certain amount of time. So to get all your case notes in, if you're working with participants there, had to be done. But it was around a government secure website to keep everybody's information safe. You'll have different processes in different organisations. You will have hard copies of versions of marked confidential files, external agency copies of information and referrals sent over from other organisations that are seeking support from the organisation you're working in. Adhering to the policies and procedures around that's how that's managed. We're all governed under the Privacy Act 1999 to ensure that a participant's information is kept confidential, and the only time that it is required would be in a court of law, and if it's requested, and they can be mandated to report those files. But other than that, information is client confidentiality. It's around respecting people's privacy here. But each organisation will have their actual processes for record management. Often they're very clear steps around adhering to, and you should be given those that training with your onboarding in an organisation. So I'm just going to press pause here and we'll go for a break. Now that's recording. I just want to also add in, we're talking about our legals and ethicals here. I wanted to make sure that we also included the workplace health and safety laws that we have to follow, and those work role boundaries that give a clear definition of the duties and the rights and the limitations of the worker. So this is where it's actually very important that you understand what your role is and what boundaries are there, and those boundaries are for your safety as well. And know when you would need to refer somebody else to another colleague or another health professional, because you don't want the misconception that you can do more than your role allows, than your skills allows as well. Think of it that way. What have they hired you for in that organisation? And this is where it's always good to refer to another colleague or to an external support for anything that's out on the outside of your professional skills and role here. And workplace health and safety. Everybody has a responsible for that to ensure a safe workplace. And that's for everyone, the organisation, the worker, and the participant. That's another one of your questions in your assessments as well. Because if we're not reporting incidences, then an accident can happen. Visitors could be harmed to a service. If we identify something that could be a risk that needs fixing, just think about an electric socket. Think about that. Think about things that you could identify that stops a risk of harm. And there's workplace health and safety legislations in all states. And just to name a few who have policies and procedures in place, especially around hazards in workplaces. There's the Workplace Health and Safety Act 2011 for New South Wales, Northern Territory, Queensland and ACT. The Workplace Health and Safety Act for South Australia and Tasmania. That's Workplace Health and Safety Act 2011 for New South Wales, 2012 for South Australia and Tasmania, the OHS Act 2004 for Victoria, and the OHS 1984 for WA. So those different years, interesting where there's been updates and amendments, but each state is guided by the Act and the year level that they're working, what they deem as appropriate for their workplace. All right, so, and just a reminder too that the chat box cannot be used during class. We don't record anything to do with chat, but learners can use that when we're not recording, okay? So we're going to do an activity now here where you're going to do a little bit of research in groups, and I'm going to have two groups look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the Australian Human Rights and outline the purpose, outline its purpose in the mental health field. And we're also going to be doing some research on what processes are there for the to getting a working with children check. And we'll also have a look at the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So I will just stop sharing here. So we've got the UN, they've got the Australian one, and we're going to have a look at working with children check and the 1989 Convention of Rights. And how do it'll be around what is its purpose in your line of work. Right, so I'm just going to stop share there. And we'll go into groups. Find my breakout room button. There it is. Right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right.
Helen, I'm happy to be in breakout room if you need me.
Okay, well, I'll leave that up to your judgment, okay?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so room 1, Rose, Teddy. Room 2, Alex, Belinda, Trudy. Room 3, Alexander, Ian, and Sagar. Now, Sagar might be in the background, but he might be with his children. It's Natalie, isn't it? Lauren, sorry. Lauren Fawkes. Got it?
Lara. Sorry.
Lara, I was close,
Super close. That's okay.
Yeah, so Lara's got her partner's name up here, so she's not Ethan, it's Lara. So it'll be Lara, Tash, and Gabby. So I'm going to open those rooms. So your task will be, and I would want group 1 to be looking up the Declaration of Human Rights and how does that align with our work in the mental health industry. Group 2, so that's Trudy, Belinda, and Alex, that is looking at the Australian human rights and how does that relate to our line of work in the mental health sector. Room 3, Alexander, Ayan, and Sagar, I would want you to find out all about a working with children check. Choose 2 different states, what's required of you, how you access that, and what's that going to do for you in the industry. And room 4, I want you to have a look, that's Lara and Tash, to have a look at the 1989 Convention of Rights of the Child. How would we use that in our line of work in mental health? Now, just remember, young people are in hospital with mental health illnesses as well. So please do that. We're going to spend 10 minutes here. Make sure when you go into your room, you connect with each other and then get into your research and then bring that back and we'll share with the class. For those at home, please do some research on that as well because it'll work for your assessments as well. Welcome back, everyone. So let's have room 1, Rose, and Teddy. You were doing the Declaration of Human Rights. How does that relate to work in the mental health field? So Rose and Teddy.
Oh, sorry, we must have just missed what you said as coming back into the rooms. I thought it was a little bit quiet there for some reason.
And in anticipation, Rose, okay? All right, so what did you and Teddy and Ro discover?
We went, so we looked at all of the human rights and the declarations and what has been adapted for Australia. And I found the mental health declaration of human rights that Australia's adapted and have, they have, what's the word? It is recognised in Australia.
Okay, and does that have a year on the end of it?
Let me just have a look. 2021.
Okay, so really recent.
Yes, that's the one. It says it's articulating the guiding principles and goals of the Commission of Human Rights with the Mental Health Declaration. and it says that there is virtually no human or civil rights to protect citizens from mental health abuse, and it is vital that the following rights be recognised and adapted in this declaration. It goes on about consent and what will and will not be accepted. Nobody will be denied their own personal liberty for a reason of a mental illness. I think that's huge. So
It
no
is.
matter
That
what,
aligns, sorry,
yeah,
I'll just let you know that aligns with the new consent laws in Australia around consent to everything.
yeah. So I think it's really good that no matter what's happening in your own mental health and mental state, you are still you're still meant to be treated like a person, you know, a
Yes.
human, and
Yep.
every single person has a right for that.
Yeah. It clearly states that it is the illness, not the person, that they're treating in that respect, but the ethical and values and missions relate to the person. How will you use that in your future line of work in the mental health sector?
I myself would be able to notice, along with my own lived experience as well, some days what you're saying, doing, seeing, experiencing, feeling, and everything like that is not who you are. It's just another day. You know, you could be severely depressed or severely sad or anxious or just having a really, you know, an actual be diagnosis influenced type of day, and know that that's not going to change who you are as a person. You know, it comes in waves and different strengths, and that then to be able to deal with the participant, each day is going to be different, and to not have expectations, but to expect to not have, you know, consistence, and until you get to know them and their conditions.
Yes, well said, because it's about the acceptance of person in that space, in that time frame. Because as you say, each day can be different. And this is where working from a non-judgmental framework works, in that you have no expectations. You value the person, so you value what walks in through the door. And that's who you work with, because it's about inclusiveness, not judging where that person is at that day, working with them where they're at that day. So that's a good takeaway, Rose, for you, because, you know, you're putting what you understand to it, as well as lived experience, to then go on and use that in your practice. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Ro, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was sort of looking at the principles for the protection of persons with mental illness and the improvement of mental health care from the United Nations that was adapted in 1991. A lot of it is focused around what people have the right to. So the right to best out available mental health care. What I found was quite interesting was the right to be treated and cared for within the community they live, where possible, and where, if they can't be within the community, be as close to family and friends as possible. So if they have to go to a facility, to keep them within that vicinity of their loved ones, and the right to be treated, the right to treatment suited to their cultural background, which I think is something that the assumption is made that be the case, but to actually see it written down, I think it's quite good, because I think there's a lot of assumptions can be made. Also, assumptions are made about people's different cultural background, and how you hear it all the time when you're out and about. These people are this, these people are that, and I think it's something that everybody should keep in mind about how you don't make any assumptions at all. Doesn't matter where they're from, doesn't matter what experiences they've had, you make no assumptions whatsoever of what they may be feeling, what they may be going through. Everybody reacts differently to different situations. Like, you know, 5 different people have the exact same situation, but they would all react very, very differently to it, depending on what other influences they've had within their lives, what other upbringings or cultural influence. So, yeah.
A very strong point there about not making assumptions. It's almost like a golden rule here in the mental health field, because it can be often easily, we can jump to assume something to try and connect things together. But like with Ro just said, when we don't assume and when we don't go in with that intention, you know, we treat that person as an individual, and we're finding out from them what is going on, because they're the ones with the most knowledge. If we're assuming, then we're not working to best practices. It's as simple as that, because your assumptions could be very far from the truth. So a really good point made there, Ro, about not making assumptions. Well done. Teddy, did you want to add anything? It's all good. Okay. Room 2, Belinda, Sagar, and Trudy.
Do you want to head off, Belinda, being your first night? Or do you want me
Good
to
one,
go?
Trudy.
Not really. I might give it to you, Trude.
Oh, okay. We all discussed that the Declaration of Human Rights, the Australian Declaration of Human Rights, and also the Convention, 1989 Convention for Children, is all actually very interconnected to the way we do our service delivery. And at the core, the family, especially with the 1989 Convention, is that the family's the core of it. And, you know, and the purpose in it is, if we kind of, like, as everyone said, make no assumptions and actually treat, you know, participants as people, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. But then but then it comes back, you've got to treat them as people and to some degree a friend. But at the end of the day, you're a worker. You've got to report on them. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And one thing I found, if you don't walk the walk or do the talk, participants with mental health problems and psychosocial will walk all over you and everything. And even though they deep down they hate hate the boundaries, they actually love them as well. So, but that's also you know, with the children convention. Hang on, I'll just. And also, what people are saying about the Declaration of Human Rights is that it's considering that the child should be fully prepared to live an individual life in society and brought up with the spirit of ideals in the Charter of the United Nations, and in particular the spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, and equality and solidarity, I think is a universal thing across. Do you have anything to add, Belinda?
No, not at all.
Okay. Sagars, Yeah. And that's what we came up with. And like everyone said, you know, I like the fact Rose said, expect no expectations. And I can tell you what, if you go in there with expectations, you're going to set yourself up for a not a good day.
Yeah.
And I just, for my shifts and whatever else, I wait until I see my participant to see what we do. You know, even though I've got about 5, 6, I've got lots of options. I can't commit to anything until I see them. So
yeah, where they're at in that moment, in that space,
exactly.
and valuing that for them.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Some really good practices already in place here, everyone. Well done. All righty. Was Sagar with you as well?
Yes. He you know, virtually said the same thing as us as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And about how I think the universal of Declaration of Human Rights covers everyone, intersex, the LGBT alphabet,
yes,
and everything else. And that actually comes in with what I read about the family, is that it doesn't matter what type of family it is, it shouldn't be discriminated against.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
because it wasn't.
Sorry, you go. I'm just buttoning.
Oh, go on. No, you can have a.
I was going to say it also goes in accordance to the mental health and the condition of people's minds. So you can't discriminate against a person with a mental illness in that regard. Yeah.
And a lot of those discriminations that they do face are because of the behaviours they might display. And that's where judgment comes in, assumptions come in, and we're hearing that we're not to work with those. So it is a challenge too, as well, because that's where we have to have best knowledge of practices here to understand why we do what we do in the field. Good work. Thank you. Right, so we've got Alexander, Ian, Lara, and Tash. Now, I think there was a mix here of room 3 and 4. So let's hear from each of you if you have something to share.
I think we all thought we were just in group 3, I think. So we've just been working on the working with children's checks. So does anyone want to lead? Otherwise, I don't mind.
Good. I'm going to sit in the background.
Cool. Just give me 1 sec. So I've just got far too many tabs open. Just got to find one more extrovert things down. So we were looking at all about the working with children check. So we were looking at 2 different states. We ended up looking at 3 just because we're sort of all around and we all have our relevant states sort of things. And in general, what's required in all of them is, correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. In all of them, the only thing that's required is the proof of identification and then actually passing the check. So if you don't pass the check, they will send you what is, at least for, hold on, let me check, Victoria, you get a interim working with children exclusion, after which you can apply, and then if you don't pass, you get an actual working with children exclusion. It just shows they believe you pose an unjustifiable risk to children.
We just lost your sound a bit, your volume, Alexandra, a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
That's better, yeah. So yeah, the exclusion just shows that they believe you pose an unjustifiable risk to children. And I'm pretty sure, again, that that's similar across all states. So other questions we had quickly. Sorry, again, I'm switching between tabs and I didn't organize them properly.
That's all right.
So what that does for you in the industry to have one, everyone else in our group actually had a few things to chime in on this, but generally it's a basic access ticket. Adults who work or volunteer in child-related work, especially, this one's from New South Wales, must have working with children check, and employers and organizations must verify the details and keep records of anyone they have in child-related work. We all talked as well about the importance of actually having it with you in those positions, not in your car, and potential fines of around $2,000 and several other things.
And it's interesting too, if you're out with a group of young people and something happens to one of those young people, if they were having causing a disturbance or something like that, and say you'd gone to the movies with them and the centre manager might have said, that the young person's too loud, or, to do something about it. And if that person said, yes, they're in my care, they have the right to ask for the working with children check, because they're not their legal guardian. So interesting that people can, so it was designed to actually check that somebody with authority has management over them, but they're not legal guardians. So if they had to call the police, or if they had to do something like that, they'd have to then know to be able to ask the police to call their parents, or which the worker would do that anyway. But shopping centres and entertainment areas have now been given that guidance as well. And I think it's because of different things that have happened around the world with children who have been on excursions and activities. Interesting. I've never seen it happen, but I was at a network meeting where they brought it up, that they were advised that was something that's going to be put into play. So
I think also over here, they also have like, it applies to the share riders, so Uber drivers and taxis.
So did you say that last bit again, please, Aya?
In Canberra here, so our working with vulnerables, like working with children, it included it's included in the ride shares and taxis and all that stuff.
Ah, yes, okay, yep. So there you go. Thank you. Lara?
I was just going to say that with the question that you originally posed about the Convention of Children's Rights, that is an agreement that every country signed, that basically means that every child under 18 should have the right to live a safe, healthy and happy life, which is quite lovely. But yeah, basically they all listened to a bunch of experts talk about it and went, yep, sounds good, and signed. So that's that.
Now let me pose this question. Do you think those rights can be adhered to in the sector?
I think it's a goal for sure. We can't always, like, I know in my line of work especially, there's only so much that you can do within your boundaries, without overstepping and without creating a power imbalance between you and the client or the individual. I think that it's our job to identify that there are needs not being met, and therefore figure out a way to, in the background, be doing, working offense rather than defense, I guess.
Yes. So it's looking for those opportunities to be able to adhere to that, but it's not something you can necessarily always do.
Yes, and that's the difficult thing, because as an empathetic human whose job is to try and help the person, you want to sort of go in there guns blazing. But unfortunately, and I've seen it so often in my job, that like if you go in guns blazing, they are more likely to spook and run the other way. Like, you've got to be really consistent. And then it can work in the inverse, in that they get pissy at you for not doing enough, or being a little bit useless, I guess. But you have to adhere to a timing and a sense of pace.
Yes, yeah. which can feel restrictive in some ways, but it's there for a reason. But then, you know, the work boundaries come into it, the legal and ethicals. But sometimes what I found was that challenged to even meet all those, like the Declaration of Human Rights, the 31 rights that are in that, because number 25 has part B into it. The idealism is there. So the Human Declaration right isn't law for a start. It's a declaration to bring companies in. So it's not an actual legal thing to be adhered to. It's an aim. It's a goal. It's an envisioned hope.
Sure.
The interesting compared to the Australian human rights, there are different sectors to it. Yeah, go on, Lara.
Oh no,
You were going to say.
I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, it's so everybody has the right to freedom of choice. Does that happen? No. It doesn't happen. It's everybody has the right to have safe housing. Does that happen? No. Everybody has the right to not be discriminated against. Does that happen? No. Because that's a part of society then, isn't it? And it's what society's doing. So then where is society trying to aim to work towards that? Adam?
I was just going to say the problem with the human rights agenda in Australia is that it's not enshrined in the Constitution, and until it is, there's not a legal redress to it. It's always a bit, you know, there's an ombudsman, there's a group, there's this, but until it's actually part of the Constitution, like it is in a lot of other countries, it doesn't have the teeth. It has the ethical, moral ideology behind it, but it doesn't actually have any teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Right, let me share my screen again. All righty, so in mentioning there around professional boundaries as well, that's another thing that we must adhere to retain professionalism, and to ensure the safety of the people that we're working for and our safety as well as an organizational expectation here. And to do that with working with our participants and even members of a support network that you could be working with in the community. It's about limiting disclosure of personal information, not sharing data on participants, setting yourself clear boundaries as well, setting those set of standards that your organization expects, but for your own personal self, set yourself those expectations as well. This is a tricky one sometimes, not preferencing one client over another, because you might work well with somebody. Never accepting gifts or money. Now, certain organizations will allow gifts as long as they're passed through your supervisor. So a gift of flowers or chocolates can often be automatically accepted as long as you say to your manager, this is what I've been gifted. Is that okay? When it becomes something bigger and different, then that needs to be checked with your line manager, for sure. And in the workplace, never borrowing or lending money. Participants, colleagues, because if there's an issue, then that goes against your professional boundaries within the workplace as well. Lots of things to consider. And of course, we have all the codes of practice for standards in the workplace here, and you'll see them here. And the good one to go and have a look at is the National Framework for Recovery Orientated Mental Health Services. Really interesting around how they look at recovery, and it actually is orientated through the journey, through the workers and the participants and the stakeholders in that person's life. But do have a look at that. If you search that name, it'll certainly come up. Now, we all also adhere to the Mental Health Workforce Act in many states, and each state might have a different year level on those as well. Codes of practices and policies and frameworks and practice standards all have to comply with industry levels. And these policies actually have to ensure, the organisation has to ensure that they stay up to date with any updates or amendments on these. And it's a good way to often know what's going on in the industry, we can all subscribe to newsletters to find out what's going on in the industry. Subscribe to Beyond Blue, Black Dog Institute. Black Dog Institute does the research. The Mental Health Practitioners Network, the Phoenix Australia Trauma Informed Research Team, getting their newsletters, seeing what's coming out in the latest of research and practices. You can actually join industry groups around networking groups, as they call them, in certain areas. And you might have an area of interest. So you can actually, for instance, the Mental Health Practitioners Network has all different networks, from the group that actively research and look into ADHD. Another one looks at the EMR therapy services. There's all different things out there that networks actually have a base interest on, and being involved, at least in the newsletter level. It's quite interesting to see what comes through. Another way, certainly, getting emails around industry journals. Now, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, has papers that come out every month, and somebody's done this extensive research on all these weird and wonderful different things. And it actually gives you an insight into the other side of the mental health spectrum from across the world. So all you have to do is get onto the BMJ and sign up for their newsletters, and you'll see papers come out. Especially interesting to find out how other countries are dealing with mental health crises and what their interventions are, what struggles the medical profession is facing in different countries, what research is coming out from different countries, and their findings. Can be quite interesting when nothing's good on TV. So now we're going to look at values and principles of recovery. So we're flipping over now to that goal planning and support and interventions. And if we can remember that the idea of recovery is a very personal thing to the participant, to each individual person. And the recovery orientated practice that we would use as workers refers to the principle which underpins all the planning, the support, the interventions, and the aims are all leading towards recovery. And this is where having an understanding too of trauma-informed practice is also quite handy to have this understanding, because a lot of people have lived through trauma in all different ways through their lives. So understanding what that means for them and how that can affect behaviours and recovery, because you've got somebody who might have had a traumatic episodes, they are living with a mental illness and ill health, and they also might have comorbidities because of physical health. All these things can impact on somebody's recovery. So having a good understanding, but having an understanding of the principles of how these all have an interplay, how they all interconnect some way. So with values and principles, we all have to be aware around that health promotion, how we're recognising and addressing all different health and wellbeing issues. Think about the impacts on communities around health and wellbeing. What mental health things are impacting communities within your area right now? And we still have data coming out from the pandemic that still has isolation and a lot of young people still struggling with moving forward from that period of time and having a lot of anxieties and fears. And that was one of the latest data that came out this week. And we're also looking at how we work in a holistic approach. So when we say we see the whole person, we're saying, and we've heard it here tonight quite a few times, we see the person, we see the illness separate. When we do that holistic approach, it's that physical, spiritual, cultural, medical factors, everything, biopsychosocial, genetics, social, emotional, physical wellness, environmental factors are huge here in a holistic approach as well. So think about when we're talking about recovery, we have to also understand where that participant is within their environment, because that will have effects for them. There could be barriers there that we need to understand and help them work through that. There could be barriers that we could help them change. It could be around, just per se, around homelessness. That could be something that you might be able to help towards. It could be around accessing physical health services to help with other things that they're living with comorbidities. So working in a holistic approach, seeing the person, the mental health here, their environment that can impact, and how does that make them unique? If we look at each person with open eyes, with uniqueness, individualized, we see them for who they are. And part of our work, and as we're going along the recovery road, is around those early interventions. And the earlier that we can bring in support for different areas that need to be addressed for as early as possible for the participant, the change down the line is so much different. the outcomes for them, the recovery process of going through something and looking at it in earlier than rather than later, when lots of other behaviors and issues have come up from that as well. So looking at the needs right now and addressing those as you work with that participant, and thinking about them as part of their community. How are they involved in that community? Because when we work, and these two things go together, this early intervention and feeling involved in something, because feeling involved in something, being a part of something, helps build resilience, yes, but it's about being accepted and being a part of something. And if somebody's a part of something, they can have more awareness of what's happening for themselves as well as what's going on around them. So when they can identify a need to you, and it's earlier, you can get in and do that early intervention process, those strategies, and put things in place. And it's been proven that people who have social participation have more general awareness of what happens for them in different environments. And this is where the participants' identification becomes clearer, because they react different in different environments if they're willing to be a part of a community group or socially active and feeling socially included. So let me jump down here. Yep. So of course, don't forget we supply our participants with lots of information, brochures, lots of different ways that we can do that. One of the things we can do with a recovery process and that wellness plan is that have a shared agreement of what you're working towards and what you're collaborating with somebody with for their recovery action plan. Their overall wellness depends on how we also too help them bring that into the plan and act upon it. So the saying is to be on the same page. So for us as workers to be on the same page as the participant. And this is where really good discussions and conversations around goals, needs, expectations, perceived outcomes, some things that mightn't be achievable, but finding different ways to do things, finding out that participants' personal beliefs and their values, and asking them what their preferences are for certain things, not assuming, like we said. But the biggest thing you can do to work with somebody is build a rapport. See them as a human being, like it's been said tonight, valuing difference. But when you build a rapport with somebody, the change for a lot of people, that person sees me. They don't see just my mental illness, they see me. That makes a huge difference for somebody. Lara?
In the reading in the learner guide today, there was a really good point that was made that said that the individual is the expert on their on what works and what doesn't, and you have to let them lead. So obviously our goal is to help facilitate and be the the person that makes all the connections, but it's their experience and they're the ones that know what's worked for them and what hasn't, and you have to sort of let them lead rather than try and lead them. Yeah.
And this is where, if you follow the collaboration rule, you stand side by side.
Yeah.
You don't stand over, you stand side by side. And even to the point of instead of sitting in front of, like opposite this way, even sitting side by side with somebody who finds it hard to connect, often works better when you sit on a side angle instead of directly opposite in front of them, because if you've got a desk in between you, there's a power imbalance. You're the one in the chair, you're the worker. So perceived perceptions, right? So often when you come out from around that, and often you'll see in offices where they have a desk and a chair set up, but then they'll have two chairs sitting over, maybe facing each other. What I found in working with domestic violence with young men especially was doing that circle sitting, but we were all side by side when we were talking on an angle. So we were just sort of slightly like that. We weren't side by side sitting like soldiers. We were just slightly on and then somebody would be then just sitting here, so you could still just turn your head gently to see them, but it wasn't directly right at them. And that actually made a difference 8 times out of 10. And we did that for a whole year. We assessed that for a whole year. And the response was, it feels like you're sitting with me, not over me.
Sometimes a good technique to getting people to to make that power imbalance a bit less imbalanced is to sort of get them to do something with you. So like help you with something. So I do a lot of art therapy, and it's a really amazing tool to be like, we need to do this. I'm going to set this up so that you set them up with something they can't fail at, and that automatically gets them out of the spotlight and into a place of wanting to work and wanting to do. And then usually it's like the doorknob question as they're leaving. They'll be like, oh, and by the way, and they'll give you the real nitty gritty information that you've been looking for, or that key to helping them next time. Like they might hate art, they might hate everything about it, and you go, cool, you definitely want to do this again. But it's a way of
We'll try clay next time, so you can throw that around and see how that feels. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's so true. It's honestly, like that's just what works. I've seen what works, because it's good to say all this stuff, but for me, it's the practicality of it. It's like, well, what does that look like in my job?
Yeah.
What does that look like when I'm talking to someone? So that's just something that I found that works.
An activity is always a way that you're working on something together, the analogy of it all.
Yeah.
You're working on something, you're creating something together. Then you can use that analogy to the recovery plan. This is how we can work on the recovery plan together. We're both going to have input into this, but you are showing me what you prefer. I'm just helping you find those things. So you can bring in all those analogies, those tools, understanding, to be able to understand what somebody's goals are. Sometimes we have to do these different types of activities, but establishing what they call mutual understandings is important, so you know that you're doing the right thing for the participant, exactly what they want in their plans. But it's how you do it. It's how you physically do it. It's what you physically say. It's how you say it, the tone. How invested are you in that? They'll pick it. They will pick it whether you're invested in it or not. That then can block. If you're not invested, they can tell that you're not interested. So then they feel that they won't build that trust and open up and give you those nitty-gritty bits. It all matters, but it takes time. It takes time. Right, now I wanted to cover quickly, hang on, where are we? John, let me bring it up. Nope. Here we go. Making sure that minimizing misunderstandings, especially in cultural different views and goals in a wellness plan for different people from different cultures, that they're culturally at play. There's a whole different perspective and views coming from here. And there could be historical, there could be new thoughts, but the thing is that to minimize anything here, making sure we're taking the time to understand fully the direction of where the individual wants to go, what their goals and values are. Just remember, you might even need an interpreter. You might need a cultural interpreter, not a language interpreter, a cultural interpreter, because culturally there'll be different practices in play that to do with mental health. So some countries don't recognize mental health illness. All these things matter with all the individual people that we would be working with. Now, let me see, did I find it up here? I've missed one somewhere. I'm just trying to find it. So for the planning processes for the recovery and wellness plans, one of the most popular ones is WRAP, W-R-A-P, and that actually has a workbook, has an action plan form, and a lot of primary healthcare services use this program as well. Get on and have a look at it. I think somebody actually might have mentioned it earlier in the class before. And it's a very holistic approach to an action plan for recovery. And when we're using something like that, we're then contributing the best practice standards that we have, our guidelines and codes of practice. So they all come together. It's a holistic approach here that we bring all our skills into it, but our strategies, our processes, the way of being, our values, our missions all matter. Now, we have a case study here. I might actually bring it in next week because it's going to take about 10-15 minutes to do, because we're getting close to 9 o'clock. So just for everybody to go over the resources here for if you need assistance with your studies or want to book in to work with a trainer, lso@haiderinstitute.edu.au. Belinda, are you still here? She's here? Yep. All right, so Belinda, these are the links I was talking to you about that to seek support. So this link here takes you to where you can directly book in with a trainer under the heading of either youth work, ComServes, mental health. So you choose what you want to do, what you need support with, whether it's going to be a role play, unpack a task, it's a bit like having a mission. If you're going to email the LSO team, state what you're looking for support with, what the module name is. It's just that they're trying to streamline the processes here. And if you can state what course you're in, what module you want support with or role play, and what task number, task 1, 2, 3, 4, and put that in an email. And we have new staff that are trying to handle these requests for support much quicker. Now, also, just as the last thing, your self-help list. Just remember, we're coming up to Are You OK Day, and Want to make sure that you have all your resources, because you might need it for somebody else, you might need it for yourself, family member, a friend, but it's always good to make a list of resources for you to have for your future work or the work that you're already in. Have a list of resources. These are also handy for some of your assessments. When it says, what mental health support service would you be able to add into somebody's recovery and wellness plan? So for strategies for when people are not receiving support, so those out of hours times, where do people go? What do they do? So in your plans, you can actually be putting in the Lifeline, Beyond Blue. Think of those things that are there for, can be used as supports. And, but yes, you can also use these in your resources. Okay, let me just finish up there. So next week too, we'll also unpack the tasks for this assessment. And we're also getting into next week into the area around the power of attorneys and the legalities around legal protection of people's rights when being placed into mental health units and different living arrangements, especially around aged care and managing support. So there's different power of attorneys and practices that are in play for that we need to know around the legalities of. So everybody have a great week and take care.